everyone, welcome back to another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. And this is our second fireside chat. We're at the end of our Enabling Countries block, where we were looking at how countries can help to enable remote work. We've seen a lot of countries are seeking to introduce welcome stamps in response to the crisis and the fallout that's being caused in the tourist industry, particularly from COVID-19. So we've been exploring what are the challenges associated with this and how countries can better attract digital nomads or remote workers, but also what are the things that are needed within those countries to really help them to develop as digital nomad hotspots. So we have with us, I'm very happy with the panel that we have. We have some of our previous guests, but also we have our additional expert. So you're familiar with Jeremy Stephen, who spoke to us in episode 6 about embracing a digital economy, and Kevon Swift, who spoke to us last week with regards to how to improve digital security online. And we're also joined this week by Mr. Niel Harper. And Niel is, I'm going to say, a cybersecurity expert, but Niel will tell you a bit more about himself and what he does. And I'm actually going to start off with you, Niel, with regards to this whole topic and the push really now to create these digital nomad hotspots. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then tell us, what do you think about the Caribbean and other parts of Europe? Well, we'll use the Caribbean as an example to begin with, but what do you think of this push now to become nomad hotspots?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's good to be here with this esteemed group of persons. Just a bit about my background. I would say that my work is mainly at the intersection of technology, regulation, and a business. So it's really looking at some of the complex issues which occur at the intersection of those three things. You know, and I've worked a lot in cybersecurity. I've worked a lot in internet governance. I've also worked in capacity building as well as engineering, especially around critical infrastructure. Yeah. So in terms of this move to digital nomadism, you know, I think we've seen as a direct response to the pandemic, where countries are looking at it as a means to recover or start to recover their tourism industry. You know, you're seeing more and more these visas. You're seeing them in the region. Barbados has one. I think Kitts has one. A number of countries have them. But I think what countries are realizing now that they've moved full steam into this is that just giving people a visa, a long-term visa, is not necessarily a grounds for attracting large amounts of digital nomads. The digital nomadism is a very niche type of thing. You know, if you look at statistics, most digital nomads make anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 US a month. The expectation around their expenses is anywhere between 1,500 and 1,700 US a month, and that includes accommodation, internet, transportation, food, etc. And you know, there's an expectation for digital nomads in terms of one, the expenses that they pay, but also the community that is available for them in terms of how they engage. Many of them are involved in tech. They're either the developers, they're startup entrepreneurs. So they're looking for a community of people that they can build relationships with, that they can exchange ideas, they can enter into collaboration to innovate and deliver solutions to some key problems. And I think one of the biggest gaps in a lot of developing countries, especially the ones jumping on the digital nomad bandwagon this year, is that they don't have those built-in communities of interest. And I think that's going to prove challenging in terms of attracting digital nomads.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that was one of my first concerns when I heard about it, particularly within the Caribbean context. While they're now starting to respond to that, and I think it's good you're seeing that learning curve is happening very quickly, where persons are now trying to put that infrastructure in place. But as you said, this is something that needs a lot of deeper thinking, and it needs to happen on a more wide scale and long-term strategic plan in mind. So it can't be overnight. What do you think, Jeremy? Because I know you have some very, let's say, powerful views also on a lot of regions now seeking to introduce digital nomads, visas, and hotspots, and what that means for the actual country itself in terms of the infrastructure.
Well, it hasn't changed since we last talked. So just to reiterate, it's pretty much a poison chalice on one end and then a great opportunity on another. And Niel might have been, pleased to probably hear that I still think the fact that we do not have any legislative means to security, especially when it comes to reprisals from security or for security. Case in point, what just happened here very recently with Ansel McCall and the hack, and the fact that they haven't been forced by law to reveal exactly the true nature of what's happening. You're hearing that under the cracks. Yeah. And, those things speak volumes when it comes to people who work in information or work with information. And predominantly your nomads, digital nomads, will be working with information sets. They'll be away from where the substantive posts are physically. So, that itself presents a major challenge in my view continually. And, unless we get the legislative end correct, not just introducing that particular legislation that allows people to come here for extended periods, but more so what protections are we going to afford them and wider society. Also, when it comes to issues involving sexuality, I brought that up. And interestingly, more recently than not, the church is protesting gay marriage, which I found to be strange since the legislation is even speaking about marriage. Is more so a case of civil unions and the right to property, really, but civil unions nonetheless. So that itself also presents a challenge. But nonetheless, there are 1,000 people who have successfully applied thus far since we last spoke. And they seem to be on island. There's a WhatsApp group. If any of you get into that group, let me know, of all of the digital nomads locally. And insofar, they've been loving their experiences, but they're creating a bit of an enclave themselves, an expat enclave, which I thought would have been not very productive, because one of the benefits of having remote workers here, you imagine, would be skills transfers. And that comes from being integrated. When Niel is in San Francisco, as I'm sure he has done before, it's not as if he's not mixing with someone else from San Francisco. Even if they're in the same tech community, he still integrates in some way. It's not just entertainment. It's not just him going to the supermarket. It's him working out. It's him having just casual conversations in a coffee shop because he's working in a coffee shop. And maybe we don't have those facilities just yet that properly allow those persons to integrate in a way that differs from just the normal tourist who comes and leaves. So those are the downsides. Sorry to start with that. The obvious downsides that come to me right now. But the upside obviously is the impact on the country's wider GDP. Those same people will be consuming. Barbados is recent statistics have pointed it up towards 84% consumption driven. I always say 80, but then had to do some work for my boss recently and had to update that data. So it's 84% consumption driven. So if these people spend, if they rent, if they pay utilities, all of that factors into a wider economy or wider economic benefit. Yeah. So, the 1,000 people may result in, given their levels of incomes, not a 1% increase in GDP, don't get me wrong, but definitely it would assist in the recovery that's necessary for the country, Barbados I'm speaking about in this case, to regain most of the 15% loss due to the pandemic. Yeah. I don't even believe it's 15%, to be honest, but hey, those are official statistics. That's the main benefit, one would hope, if things were ultimately set up to be proper, that you would see skills transfers eventually. It increases the capacity of the island to network with productive younger people who may very well want to invest in the country or have the capacity to do so in ways that are not typical of what our current tourist market might do, which is you put a home up here, you come here, you do nothing, or you just leave it for much of the year. These guys might wish in the future to set up businesses. They might wish to integrate themselves a little bit better. I met one, I'll close on this. I met one guy, there was 3 actually, buying fish from Pat. So again, why the GDP impact? And I had on one of my pilot shirts with the insignia of the institution that I'm training with right now, FTI, Flight Training Institute. And the guy notices and started asking me questions and says to himself, you know what, since I'm here, I'm going to take up flying. Let me take this number off of, flying is not cheap. It's like $475 for the plane that I rent, $475 an hour. So that also has a significant impact, though most of it might be going into fuel nonetheless. And the owner of the plane's hands, it still provides some measure of sustainability for the owner of that vehicle that the school leased from him. So I see it from both angles. I'm not 100% gun-ho that it would work, simply because for reasons that both Kevon and Niel will talk about extensively, I think we're not there yet to fully exploit the situation for what it's worth for all of us across the region.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to pull out something you said with regards to that hack, because I know, Kevon, that's your particular specialty area. One of the things that really worries me about that is where you said in terms of the legislation and us not being given the amount of information. And this isn't just in the Caribbean context. Well, within the European context, you do see if within the UK, if a hack takes place, then you're given the extent of information in terms of the company would email you and say, this person had access to your personal information, your email, you might want to change your password, they now know this. But whereas within the Caribbean context, you don't have that. That presents a real worry. So what were your views on that?
And before I go there, I'm a customer too of Answer. I have been, I can't use certain words since this has an international audience, but I have been really sweating bullets. I didn't want to say sweating bullets, but I've been sweating bullets. What these hackers might know about me from the fact that I've had insurance with Answer Macau. I've bought a car off of Answer Macau, so there might be some vital information that these security questions as well.
Exactly. So Kevon, you brought up some really interesting issues about that in our recent episode with regards to the policy that's needed around when those sort of, let's say, infractions or cyber attacks happen. So what are your views in terms of the risk presented, especially in a case like this that Jeremy just mentioned?
Yeah, exactly to this very point. So beyond the question of legislation for security, there needs to be an entire ecosystem that's created around that. And that ecosystem will comprise, for instance, CSIRTs, which are Computer Security Incident Response Teams. And it requires, well, the whole creation of trust communities so that when incidents do happen, you can have somewhat of a what do you call that, appropriate and acceptable level of response to things going on. But to the very point that Jeremy has been discussing, that you have reminded us, we have, it's a condition probably of small societies where we tend to not share information very easily. And things like reputational risk are serious concerns for a lot of people. Yeah, that's why they don't do it. When you try to look at how you regulate in the space, or how you try to do, let's say, proactive measures for security in the Caribbean, we don't have the data, we don't have the statistics to support that. When you look at the statistics that are usually captured, they're captured by major antivirus companies. And for the most part, it will be within a repository called Latin America and the Caribbean. And on the Caribbean side of things, we're probably just given one broad brush approach as to what happens in the Caribbean without the people who are doing the research understanding the sort of nuances that we have from territory to territory that we are well familiar with. And that would be a serious concern, because yes, reputation is a huge deal for what we want to do online. We want to encourage people to come here to transact, to do everything that they need to do as if they were in any other part of the world. But they also have to have that assurance that the work that they're doing isn't subject to attacks. And as we have discussed in our podcast, it will happen at some point to some level. And when an incident or attack does happen, we need to have the appropriate response for that. So that's one of the issues that I think it is very critical for us to work on in this whole exploration into digital nomadism. The
Yeah.
other point I want to tack on to there is the environment itself. For me, one of my pet issues deals with network resilience, and the folks in a group called the Caribbean Network Operators Group, CARIBNOG, they speak about this at length. We are in a region that's very vulnerable to natural disasters.
Yeah.
And before we talk about the digital nomadism and giving visas for that, we have to ensure that our system is resilient for what is our everyday life. In this space, I mean, that was when 2017,
Yeah.
when 2 major hurricanes, category 5, unprecedented, ravaging across the Caribbean. These are things that seriously impact the sort of experience you can have as a digital nomad in this part of the world compared to anywhere else. So it's all well and good to say, okay, we want you to come here, and then you will hopefully contribute to the environment around you, providing that you're not in an enclave. And based on what Jeremy and Niel have experienced, we notice that people come here and they remain in their enclaves. But beyond that, ensuring that we have that sort of environment that is resilient, that stands up to everything. Ensuring that, for instance, there's a proliferation of IXPs, and I say IXPs, Internet Exchange Points, functional IXPs in the Caribbean. We have about a dozen. Some of them are functional to various degrees. Some of them are an IXP on paper. And we have to ensure that these sorts of infrastructure are there and are present for us to have this sort of resilient and robust environment that is really attractive for encouraging digital work and digital nomadism in this area, and encouraging our own digital growth internally, because it's not just a question about foreigners coming here and have an internet access, internet connection. It's really about trying to see as well that our environments continue to grow and grow in a way that is sustainable and resilient and is attractive for future digital endeavors. So I'll stick a pin in right there, and let's go through another round of
Yeah, well, I'll open it up to you guys, but just before you guys respond as freely as you like, I would just say I think with your point to transparency, a lot of international companies recognize that even in making their mistakes, by just offering their customers that open transparency and saying, well, this is what's happened, this is what we're doing about it, that actually improves the commitment or boosts the commitment to the customer with regards to the brand, because they appreciate that. So taking this approach of, okay, this has happened, but we don't want you to know how bad it is because then you might leave us. You're putting the customer at risk, but you're still putting your reputation at risk as well. So this fear of reputation, I think, and withholding information as a result is still risking company reputation. So I don't know what you guys think with regards to what Kevon said.
So just to expand on Kevon's last bit of information, I think we have a lot of discussions throughout the region, a lot of lip service about moving to technology, ICT at the foundation of our economic development, buzzwords, and we've done a lot of that. We've done multiple cycles of that, but I think what's missing largely is political will, for one, an agreement and a consensus amongst regional governments that cyber security is a priority issue, and a strong awareness of how online trust impacts the transition to becoming a digital economy.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more in the region where, like, Barbados government would have approved privacy legislation on July the 24th last year, but the legislation has not been proclaimed, so which means it's really not legislation.
Yeah.
And what that does in terms of how it impacts the country.
Mm.
If you have European Union citizens who have been approved for a digital nomad visa and they come to work out of Barbados, they may experience problems where a number of their organizations can't allow them to access certain sensitive information because we don't have an adequate privacy and data protection framework that protects that data. You know, there's no privacy principles in place which are driving how the data is protected. There's no obligations for online services, as both Jeremy and Kevon spoke about mandatory breach notification. You know, there's not enough robust legal mandates and controls in place to protect them. You know, furthermore, we're seeing there's not any coordination either across the region amongst regional governments in terms of one sharing and threat intel, terms of coordination in terms of combating online crime. There's not enough of an impetus, again, as both of the gentlemen spoke about, security incident response, both at a national level, but also on a regional level in terms of coordination. There are no champions. If you look across the CARICOM region, there's no government official who has championed the issue of cybersecurity. And there's really been no discussion. I think this is the first discussion I have actually been part of or heard where people are discussing cybersecurity and the impact on the digital nomadism. So that's very interesting for me. And just a bit back to resilience as well.
Yeah.
I was in a discussion about a week ago with the head of with the heads of a number of disaster emergency agencies in the region. And they were talking about, you know, preparation for natural disasters, preparation for storms and, you know, floods and stuff like that. And I said to them, do you have a cyber attack in your list of risk events that would necessitate you to incur your national disaster emergency apparatus? And they said, why would we do that? That is not an emergency. I said, wait a minute. If there's a coordinated attack against critical infrastructure in your country, whether it be your electric grid, whether it be your telecoms companies, whether it be your water companies, because many water companies are now IT enabled, from their meters, from their telemetry systems, that they're all internet enabled. So what if there's a coordinated attack? What mechanisms do you have in place to respond? And they said to me, many of them said, that's not our responsibility, that's the defense force. I was like, no. Okay. So, I mean, so those are just some of my concerns around how we create that environment to make the use of online services, that experience by both our locals but our digital nomads, make that experience a quality experience, a safe experience, and an experience that aligns with international regulations and best practice.
Yeah. Yes, exactly on Niel's point there. Exactly to the point there. It's interesting because and I know Niel from many years in these ICT spaces, but we still tend to treat it as a region in very siloed ways. So the whole idea that we say ICT is a cross-cutting enabler. So when we think about things like e-commerce, the trade guys are like, no, but that's an ICT issue. And it's like, no, we are engaging you. It's just trade, but via computer-mediated ways. When you talk about the entertainment industry, they say, no, we don't look at that. We just need computers. And today, you still have governments who liken the ICT question or the digital question to handed out computers. but I don't want to comment further on that. I'm talking about 2020. But yeah, Niel is raising a very huge issue that we have here in the region, and it deals with signaling. So for the legislative standpoint, we signal when we say that we have produced an act, that things are ready, we are ready for business. We signal that we have data protection legislation, we signal that we have cybercrime legislation. If you were to look at our previous behaviors in international agreements, our foreign policy in the region, you would see that many Caribbean territories have actually been signatories to a lot of agreements that they haven't actually domesticated in internal law and actually implemented. And the fear that we have here when it comes to the digital landscape is that this signaling will not work to our advantage because there isn't really any sort of substance to back it up. So when we talk about security, security is not just about having the legislation, it's about active defense, and active defense which is supported by evidence, is supported by research, is supported by active policy work that can inform these things. And it's similar to any other digital, what do you call that, issue area that you want to do. But our behavior so far has been about, okay, let's proclaim, well, let's at least create a law, and then we somewhat fiddle on how we actually intend to proclaim that law, because we're not using it very much so in an enabling capacity, but still from the perspective that laws and legislation is more about sanctioning and punishing, as opposed to actually guiding and encouraging the sort of environment that we have.
Yeah, more proactive laws rather than reactive.
Well, I never heard of a law that is proactive in nature. Laws tend to prescribe treatment after the fact, sadly. But you would think that in the space of having seen best practices, I would say that companies and institutions would take those best practices and seek to apply them and lead legislation, let legislation react to what the good practices that are being implemented. And funnily enough, to talk on another issue, and I can speak about it a little more freely now since Cabinet has decided to ratify the position. Although I might take some flack for it, the prices that are coming out for the legal, for the medicinal marijuana licenses, I set those a few months ago. And interestingly, you know, what informed the law, what informed the regulations, what informed those prices came from looking at best practices of what was implemented beforehand. Sadly, in the area of ITC, this is what's strange to me. We've known what the best practices have been for many years. I sit on the fringes, unlike these gentlemen in this area, more into econ and finance. But you see, I also understand that ITC, it should be viewed more as a tool as opposed to institutions themselves, and that should have their own specialists. And as a result, everybody should be lobbying for that kind of change and that kind of protection. In fact, I'm reminded of something I learned just yesterday. The ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, always reacts based on or informs change in regulations and laws, civil aviation laws across all member states according to isolated incidents. So a very famous example was there was someone who didn't speak, a pilot who did not speak English as a first language, but the language of aviation is English. And back in the, I don't even remember which year it is now, sadly, but some years back, one of the things that ATC, the air traffic control, could say to pilots when asking them to, to make a request of them, they would say, go ahead. But go ahead could mean many things. And apparently to this pilot, it meant cross the active runway, right?
Oh,
that resulted in an incident. So ICAO, upon this incident being highlighted, ban air traffic controllers and pilots from ever using the term go ahead. So it's not even part of the lingo of radio telephony, right? So this is what I like to see for something like IT that develops so quickly. That can also be very, very volatile. And I support the notion that a very integral part of the success of these programs regionally depends on our response to impending threats, particularly those that will affect remote workers, which more than likely will be IT related. And thank you, Kevon, for bringing this up, climatic as well.
Yeah. And what do you guys think about from the local perspective? Because a lot when we speak about ICT and providing that protective infrastructure and security, especially with having that coordinated and regional response. All of these things are good for the digital nomad, knowing that they're in this more secure environment where they don't have to worry about data protection and security. But what about from the local side as well? Because we're encouraging now, we're moving towards digitization in the Caribbean, or we're saying we're moving towards digitization. So we're also encouraging our locals to go online. You know, there's been a lot of unemployment. So we're encouraging our locals to go online, start looking for opportunities there, take advantage of these digital opportunities. And also, we want that innovation with the local digital partnerships as well. So what do you think in terms of the government's role, for example, in, I don't know, creating a more digitally literate population that can really take advantage in that scenario?
I'll touch on that briefly.
Yeah.
I'll touch on that briefly because I was thinking about it earlier. No, Jeremy mentioned that Barbados is 85% consumption, and that's more goods and services.
Yeah, both, yeah.
Both, right? Both goods and services, but for the consumption of online services, it's as well. We depend on international service providers. If you look at all of the online services, or the most of the online services that the Bajans or Trinidadians or whoever are accessing, they're accessing the Amazons, the Google, the Disney Pluses, the Netflix. We have not developed local and regional internet economies.
Yeah.
We haven't created ecosystems, enabling ecosystems to support tech startups. You know,
Yeah.
from just, if you look at how Silicon Valley emerged, a lot of Silicon Valley's initial success was based on government.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
There's no government. There's no government initiative, no agreed on government funding for tech startups. I'll give you an example as well. Even if you look at our universities, if you look at the top 100 universities in the world, most of them have accelerators and incubators built into them.
Yeah.
That instead of training students to come out and go and get a job, they train students to create their own products and services, largely digital products and services.
Yeah.
Create their own jobs, create their own companies, and hire people. Our universities are still very much in that outdated mode of go and get an education, go and get a good job and work for someone.
Yeah.
You know, I sit on the board of an accelerator and incubator in Barbados, and we had approached universities about something, hosting an accelerator and incubator within their environment to start to shift the culture, to get students to think about creating their own companies, finding technical solutions for pressing national issues. And the response from the school was, hey, we don't want to distract our students. That's a distraction. Our students need to complete their core curriculum. Teaching them how to create companies, teaching them how to innovate, how to build businesses is a distraction from their core work. Reach out to government. Government is not interested in supporting incubators and accelerators. Even if there's no financial support, there's in-kind support. There's creating the legislative framework to empower and enable accelerators and incubation and to drive national innovation.
Yeah.
We have a number of very successful private sector organizations as well who are not committed to supporting the entrepreneurship ecosystem. We have many companies all across the region who do not have corporate social responsibility programs to invest back into the communities that support their viability as businesses. So all across the board, we're seeing there's not a conducive environment to really support innovation. And there are a number of solutions, a number of innovative solutions that the region needs around green energy, around tourism, around agriculture. You know, there are a lot of technological solutions that we could find that we don't need to depend on the developed countries.
Yeah, we're just almost out of time now. But I really agree with what you're saying with that regard. I think there needs to be more done to really encourage that local innovation, but also in saying that we want Barbados to benefit from digital nomadism because of the tourist consumption when they come to Barbados. I would also like to see the knowledge transfer. That's the thing I'm really interested in. If we could have those, because you're getting minds from all across the globe, experts in various areas now based in Barbados. And we've seen within the Caribbean context, because other Caribbean countries have done it, that you have this situation where you're trying to attract nomads, but are you also considering what are the partnerships you can create to make sure you can push for innovation, because our innovation scores have not moved significantly on that global index for how many years? And you've seen countries like Estonia, for example, where the government introduced the policies and the incubators, and they really went about an entire holistic educational campaign, political campaign to make sure that the infrastructure was there. You saw Estonia really becoming a digital hotspot, not just a hotspot for attracting digital nomads, but you have things like Skype coming out of Estonia because of the level of innovation within that society. So I would really like to see that. I would love to see, as Kevon just put it, don't teach children to consume, teach them more to code.
Agree.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves as a former university lecturer.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's showing off the residency card.
I love it. I think,
Right.
yes, Niel, we need to have a whole other conversation because I want to go for that as well.
No, inspired me to get there, boy. I was thinking about it for years.
Yeah, I started applying and then I don't know, I got distracted. But we just have a minute left. We do have there's some bright sparks I'm seeing, and I feel this is now the time where people are listening in the Caribbean, just because they've seen how vulnerable they are within the current context of being so dependent, let's say, on certain organizations for jobs, or being so dependent on our very static tourism industry, which is very based on one type of tourism. So I hope that the heirs continue to listen and to take on board and to do what they have to do to implement, and to implement properly, because I always think our problem is getting from idea to action to product. And I really want to see that shift. So thank you guys so much for joining us this week. Thank you for sharing those opinions, and you shared so much knowledge. So as usual, I'm going to push as much as possible to get this information out there. But this has been another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. So thank you again for joining us, and we're going to see you soon. Take care.